Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. From Boundary to Bear Lake, Fremont to Payette, Oahe to Oneida, there are interesting people, places, and histories in all of Idaho's counties. And Idaho Matters wants to share it with you with stories from all 44 counties that make up the Gem State. Email your ideas to idahomatters@boisestate.edu or use the Talk to Us feature in our app, available on Apple and Android, and tune in each weekday at noon for Idaho Matters. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Cadet. More Idaho Matters right now. Rosemary Woodruff Leary was far more than the wife of psychedelic advocate Timothy Leary. She was a trailblazer in her own right. She was a voice for freedom, for feminism, and personal liberation during a time when the counterculture was still largely dominated by men. Now, Rosemary defied convention. She really challenged authority. In fact, some would say she carved out space for women in a revolution that promised change, but at many times during the 1960s, well, female voices were sidelined. Author Susanna Cahalan, new book, Acid Queen, dives into the life of Rosemary Leary. And Susanna is joining us now to talk more. Susanna, really nice to have you on the program.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm going to be perfectly honest, Susanna. Until I got this book, I hate to say it, I did not know who Rosemary Leary was. Was that fairly common
Oh
as
yeah.
you
Oh yeah.
were
Basically no one knew who she was or had forgotten who she was. I mean, there was a period of time before your time, before my time, where she was a one-named media heroine. This was mostly kind of in the independent, newspapers, underground newspapers. But they would say the
Mhm.
word, they would, in a headline, they would say Rosemary did this or that, and people would know who that meant, just her first name. But she was erased and forgotten. So it does not surprise me at all that you would not have known her, because I didn't either when I first started this book.
So what made you how did you find out who she was and then decide I need to write about her?
Oh yeah, so I've always been for a large percentage of my life, I've been interested in altered states, in psychology, in psychiatry, in kind of the magic bullets of the past. My first book was a memoir about my experience with an autoimmune disease of my brain, and an extreme altered states that I underwent for about a month of my life.
Mhm.
My second book, The Great Pretender, was about the history of psychiatric diagnosis. And so, these kind of threads of consciousness and selfhood, that it's always kind of been what I've been interested in. And I started kind of hearing a lot about psychedelics and this shift in the culture of our, in our views of psychedelics, that psychedelics could be medicines. And psychiatry was really embracing it. Was these like substances, though there was controversy around it. And whenever there's controversy, I'm interested. So I started to dig into the history of psychedelics. And anytime you dig into the history of psychedelics, you run right into Timothy Leary, who was this
Mhm.
pivotal figure in the 1960s. And I live near the New York Public Library, and I started going through his archives at the New York Public Library. There are about 400 bankers' boxes of his material there. And I became aware of a different collection that was also at the library, but of a woman named Rosemary Woodruff Leary. And she was married to him briefly for 7 years during the height of his notoriety. And I went through her archives. They're far less visited. There's only 20 of them. They're kind of sparse, but very deep. And I started reading her unpublished book and her memoirs and her diaries and her tax returns. And I just saw this amazing life that had been relegated to the shadows. And I knew I wanted to write about her.
Why do you think she really was relegated to the shadows? Do you believe it's the time where she really was impacting the world in this 1960s counterculture? Or frankly, is it just that so many times, I mean, great women seem to be erased?
I think both things are true. So for her specific case, she was, doing psychedelics, traversing these
Mhm.
very, illegal, they're transgressive spaces. That was hard for women to do publicly anyway. So you have a lot of psychonaut women who have been relegated to the shadows just by they've relegated themselves. They don't want to be known and be associated with these substances, with psychedelics and with drugs. In the case of Rosemary, that was that, sure. But also, she somewhat participated in this, and then the kind of Leary mythology also participated in her erasure. So at a point in their relationship, she was forced underground after she helped Timothy Leary escape from prison. And at that point,
Mm.
she had to hide in the shadows because she was running from the law. After that, Timothy Leary ended up cooperating with the FBI and turned on her, relegating her further into the shadows. And as he continued to create his mythology, her role in the kind of creation of the myth of Timothy Leary became further and further subjugated. And she
Mm.
basically became a footnote in that history.
Uh, I want to talk a little bit about the study of psychedelics, in particular. I think in sometimes what it can reveal in the brain, because this is it can be controversial even now, right?
Oh,
Psychedelics are
yeah.
not something that are in the mainstream or at least talked about. But there is a lot of scientific research around this. Why did you want to also incorporate that into the
Yeah,
book?
yeah, I mean, I think that's important because I do think that psychedelics have been seen by I think the kind of greater history as a kind of adornment to the countercultural era. There's a lot of other vestiges, women's rights, civil rights. These are kind of the big ticket items that were happening at the time, and psychedelics are seen as a kind of in the shadows way and not serious, right? At least they haven't been
Mm-hmm.
taken seriously. But there's been a shift, especially as major research institutions across the country and across the world, frankly, have really started to take these substances seriously, as a way to not only understand the mind in a new way, but also in some cases heal the mind. So there's been a lot of studies about the use of psychedelics in healing PTSD, in understanding kind of anxiety and depression and addiction. And so there seems to be some kind of window that it provides into the psyche, and a lot of exciting research going on right now. It's still very fraught. There are a lot of great studies. There are a lot of junk studies. There's a lot of controversy about how to incorporate this properly. They're still illegal. So there's dealing with
Mm-hmm.
FDA approval. So it's a really interesting, highly exciting, fraught, momentous moment in the kind of in psychiatry in particular, but in the study of psychedelics. So I really wanted to look back at the past to see, because there's if there's a through line in my work, you looking at the past really does help you see the future. And so I thought that this was a way of looking to the past to try to see a path forward in this very
Mm-hmm.
interesting time.
Oh, what about the destigmatization of psychedelics in general? Because this was something that, of course, in the counterculture in the 60s, where, Rosemary Leary was definitely fighting that, right? But
Oh yeah.
but I think you could argue that you're still fighting that even today.
Yeah, and it's complicated. So with Rosemary, her view, and Timothy Leary, who's really the face of this, he's the
Uh-huh.
ex-Harvard professor. He was the kind of acid guru. He was the one on the nightly, interview shows saying things like "turn on, tune in, drop out." In many ways, he's associated with the decline of the seriousness of psychedelics and the reason why, he's cited as one of the reasons why psychedelics were made so stigmatized. There was
Mm.
a moment when they were
Mm-hmm.
made illegal in 1970 that really shifted any research. I mean, it became basically impossible to study LSD or psychedelics at all, and a lot of people blame Timothy Leary. But in terms of this shift towards destigmatization, there's a real push to kind of medicalize them, use them as medicines. And Timothy Leary and Rosemary in particular, their philosophy was very different than what's the prevailing kind of notion now. They saw them more as tools to kind of expand the consciousness of vast swaths of humanity. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
really felt that LSD in particular, but psychedelics in general, could shift the culture by expanding our minds. It's a very, of that era perspective, but it's a
Right.
fascinating one, and one that I think is not really part of the conversation today, though it's such a big part of the early days of LSD use and research. So, and I find
Well,
that very interesting.
what I think is interesting too, though, is even if you take like something like marijuana, right,
Yeah.
where some states it's legal and depending, right? Some states it's
Hmm.
medicinal, some states it's fully legal, still not federally legal, right? And when I was growing up, it was very much considered just an illicit drug. And I fast forward to today, and all of this research around how we know how it helps people with epilepsy, how it helps cancer patients, right? Where there are these benefits from a medicinal standpoint. And there does seem to be a shift happening within our culture, around marijuana. And so similarly, I think it will take a lot longer for maybe our culture to see value in certain psychedelics. But I'm wondering if it would to make that shift. Is it going to have to come from this scientific research where it's like, look, this works in X situation, as you said,
Yes.
PTSD, right? But that would also have to be under the direction of a medical professional. We're not saying like, hey, go out there and do what Timothy and
Right.
Rosemary did.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are some you're bringing up some very interesting issues here. So I think that you're right, and I think that a lot of people who've been behind the big push for medicalizing psychedelics, and previously for marijuana, very very intertwined movements. There is,
Hmm.
the idea of having legitimate science behind it has been a real reason why this has been accepted by a broader swaths of the public. The problem is that we have a broken mental health care system in this country. People can't get care who want it and need it and who desperately need it. And the idea that something as complicated as psychedelics will just be, easily, brought into the system that barely has time for our sickest and most needy people does kind of, I have a lot of questions about that. So, what's
Hmm.
interesting about what's happened in the history is that by pushing the study of marijuana and psychedelics into the underground, into the shadows, really, but they've been making it illegal to study for so long. It's really not only have we missed out on opportunities to help people in the ways that these substances can help, but also we've missed out on opportunities of studying these substances in a way that shows the kind of spectrum. Because as much as these substances can help people, there are also people who are not helped or hurt by them. So just because we've been ignoring them, suppressing that research for so long, we're at a point now where we're entering a wider acceptance, but we're also behind on some of the research that shows the kind of the range of how it affects
Hmm.
individuals. And so it's an interesting time, and I'm someone who's excited about this research, and I think there's a lot of potential here. But Rosemary in particular really cautioned about being too evangelical about the uses
Mm.
of these drugs. She warned against. She said that not everyone should use them. That they are very powerful, and that there is a risk associated with it. She was way more circumspect than her husband was about this, and that's why I really respect her position on it, and I think it's very applicable to today.
What are you hoping folks take away when they pick up this book and read it? And first, I mean, I think are maybe introduced or reintroduced to
Yep.
Rosemary Leary.
I really want. I think to our to kind of contribute to the conversation before. I mean, I want to talk about psychedelics in a very even-handed way and really acknowledge the influence, the vast influence on our culture that is maybe direct and indirect, but substantial. And I also
Hmm.
want people to know who Rosemary is. I want to make her a part of the historical record, to right a wrong in history. And I also hope, this is a very human book. I really worked to get inside her mind. I had a lot of access to her thoughts through her diary, and I want people to identify themselves in her search for meaning. That was something that I really identified with. I'm not a psychonaut myself, but I respect that yearning to connect to something greater. And so I'm
Mhm.
hoping that readers see themselves in her and kind of feel stronger and wiser knowing her story. That's my hope for it.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us and for introducing at least me to Rosemary Leary. I appreciate the conversation.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. It was wonderful.
It's been a pleasure. We've been talking with author Susanna Cahalan about her newest book, The Acid Queen: The Psychedelic Life and Counterculture Rebellion of Rosemary Woodruff Leary. I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.